Imagine sailing toward Egypt more than 2,000 years ago. Your ship moves slowly across the Mediterranean, guided by stars and the smell of warm river winds drifting out from the Nile Delta. Ahead, the water is busy with vessels. Greek traders, Egyptian fishing boats, heavy merchant ships loaded with grain, wine, olive oil, ivory, and precious metals. Sailors shout to each other in several languages. Bells ring from harbour towers, and rising from the water like a mirage is a magnificent city. Huge temples tower above the harbour. Stone statues stand guard along the docks. Priests in white linen walk past sailors carrying offerings to the gods. Tax collectors inspect cargo. Traders argue over prices. Pilgrims arrive seeking blessings from the great temple of Amun. This city was known to Egyptians as Thonis. To the Greeks, it was called Heracleion. For centuries, it was one of the most important port cities in the ancient world. And then, somehow, it vanished. Not abandoned, not destroyed by war, it simply disappeared beneath the sea. For more than 1,000 years, people debated whether the city had ever truly existed at all. Some historians believed it was only a legend mentioned in scattered ancient texts. Others suspected the ruins might still lie hidden somewhere beneath the shifting mud and water of Egypt's coastline. Then, in the year 2000, the mystery began to surface again. Quite literally. But before we reach that discovery, we should step back into the ancient world where Thonis Heracleion once thrived. The Nile Delta in antiquity looked very different from today. Instead of a single coastline, it was a tangled network of rivers, marshes, islands, and sandbars. Waterways shifted constantly as the Nile deposited new layers of silt. Among these channels sat a thriving port city that served as Egypt's main gateway to the Mediterranean before the rise of Alexandria. Any ship entering Egypt from Greece or the wider Mediterranean would likely stop here first. Goods were inspected, taxes were collected, and merchants waited for permission to continue sailing deeper into the Nile. The city was also deeply religious. At its centre stood a vast temple complex dedicated to Amun Gereb, a local form of the powerful Egyptian god Amun. Pilgrims travelled from across the region to make offerings and attend ceremonies. According to ancient inscriptions, every year a sacred boat carrying the statue of the god travelled from the temple of Amun in nearby Canopus to the sanctuary in Heracleion. Priests, musicians, and crowds of spectators gathered for the celebration. The city was both a spiritual centre and a commercial powerhouse. Greek historians knew of it too. The famous historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, described visiting a temple dedicated to Heracles in Egypt near the mouth of the Nile. He claimed the temple existed long before the Greek hero himself supposedly lived. For centuries, scholars debated his account. Was Herodotus describing a real place, or repeating local myths? Another story tied the city to the legend of Helen of Troy. According to later Greek traditions, Helen and Paris supposedly stopped in Egypt before the Trojan War. Some writers claimed they passed through the port of Heracleion. Whether that story holds any truth is doubtful, but it shows how famous the city once was. Yet, despite its importance, the city did not last forever. Starting around the 2nd century BCE, its fortunes began to change. Part of the reason was geography. The Nile Delta is built from soft, waterlogged sediments. Underneath the ground lies a mixture of clay, sand, and silt that can behave almost like liquid when disturbed. Modern geologists call this phenomenon soil liquefaction. When earthquakes occur in such regions, the ground can suddenly lose its strength. Buildings sink, land collapses, entire sections of earth slide into nearby water. Evidence suggests that this is exactly what happened to Thonis Heracleion. Over several centuries, a combination of earthquakes, rising sea levels, and unstable sediment caused the city to slowly sink. Large sections collapsed into the surrounding lagoons. Temples cracked, harbours flooded, stone statues toppled into the water. Eventually, the entire city slipped beneath the Mediterranean, leaving only shifting sandbanks and shallow water above. Trade routes moved elsewhere. The newly founded city of Alexandria rose to dominance, and the memory of Thonis Heracleion slowly faded into legend. By the Middle Ages, no one knew exactly where it had been. For historians, it became one of those tantalizing mysteries mentioned in ancient texts, but missing from the physical map of the world. Then came a modern explorer named Frank Goddio. Goddio is a French underwater archaeologist known for searching submerged ruins. For years, he studied ancient maps, satellite data, and geological surveys of the Egyptian coastline. He suspected that several lost cities mentioned in classical sources might lie underwater in Abu Qir Bay, east of Alexandria. The water there is shallow but murky. Thick layers of silt cover the seabed, making exploration difficult. Traditional diving surveys would have taken decades. Instead, Goddio's team used sophisticated sonar and magnetometer equipment to scan the sea floor. These instruments detect buried stone structures and metal objects beneath sediment. In 2000, the scans revealed something remarkable. Large geometric shapes appeared beneath the mud. Walls, foundations, harbour structures. Soon, divers descended into the cloudy green water to investigate. What they found stunned the archaeological world. Emerging from the silt were massive statues, some more than 5 meters tall. A colossal red granite statue of a Ptolemaic king stood half buried in the seabed. Nearby lay statues of a queen and the Egyptian god Hapi, deity of the Nile's annual flood. Stone anchors littered the harbour floor, bronze coins and jewellery glimmered among the sand. Ceramic vessels still rested where ancient sailors had once dropped them. But perhaps the most important discovery was a large black stone slab known as a stela. When archaeologists cleaned the inscription, they realised something extraordinary. The text matched an inscription previously discovered on land at Naucratis. It mentioned the collection of taxes at a place called Thonis. For the first time, physical evidence confirmed that the legendary city truly existed, and it had been hiding beneath the sea for over 1,000 years. Since then, underwater excavations have revealed an astonishing amount of material. More than 60 shipwrecks have been discovered in the harbour. Hundreds of anchors suggest the port was once incredibly busy. Temple ruins stretch across several square kilometres of seabed. Archaeologists have also recovered delicate items that survived centuries underwater. Gold jewellery, ritual instruments, small statues of gods, even wicker baskets preserved in the oxygen-poor mud. Each object tells a story of daily life in the ancient port, yet the most haunting images are the statues. Many lie exactly where they fell when the ground collapsed. A giant stone face gazes upward through the dim water. A carved hand reaches from the sand. Blocks from temple walls lie scattered like fallen dominoes. It is less like a ruined city and more like a moment frozen in time. A catastrophe occurred and the city never recovered. Today, Thonis Heracleon rests about 10 meters beneath the surface. Divers who visit the site describe an eerie quiet. Fish swim through temple doorways, seagrass grows along ancient walls, sunlight filters down through green water, illuminating statues that once stood proudly in busy plazas. It is both beautiful and unsettling. But as with many ancient mysteries, the story has attracted more than just scientific explanations. Some people have proposed far more dramatic theories about the city's disappearance. One popular idea links Thonis Heracleon to the legendary lost civilization of Atlantis. The philosopher Plato described Atlantis as a powerful island kingdom that sank beneath the sea in a single catastrophic event. Because Thonis Heracleon was also swallowed by water, some writers have suggested it might be connected to the myth. Most historians strongly disagree. Plato placed Atlantis far beyond the Mediterranean and described it as a vast empire, not a regional port city. Still, the visual similarity of a submerged city fuels the imagination. Another theory proposes that the city's sinking happened suddenly in one massive earthquake. While earthquakes certainly played a role, geological studies suggest the process was slower and more complicated. Sections of land gradually weakened and collapsed over time, especially as heavy temple structures pressed into unstable sediment. There are also local legends among fishermen in the region. Some claim that during very calm nights, when the sea is still and the moon is bright, shapes of towers and walls can be glimpsed beneath the water. Whether that is folklore or the tricks of moonlight on shallow waves is difficult to say. What we do know is that Thonis Heracleon offers a rare archaeological window into the ancient Mediterranean world. Unlike cities destroyed by fire or looted over centuries, much of this one remained sealed beneath protective layers of mud. In some ways, it is better preserved than cities on land. Every artifact recovered helps historians understand how Egypt interacted with Greece and other cultures through trade, religion, and diplomacy. And perhaps the most remarkable part of the story is this. For generations, the city existed only in texts. Many scholars doubted it was real. But beneath quiet Mediterranean waters, the statues and temples waited patiently, until modern technology finally revealed them again. So, if you ever find yourself sailing along Egypt's northern coast, remember that beneath the gentle waves lies an entire ancient city. Temples, ships, statues of forgotten rulers, all resting silently on the seabed, where priests once walked and merchants once shouted across crowded docks. The lost city of Thonis Heracleon. Not a myth after all, just a chapter of history that slipped quietly beneath the sea and waited 2,000 years to be rediscovered. Picture a wide African plateau at dawn. The air is cool, the sky just beginning to glow with the pale gold of sunrise. Tall grasses sway gently in the wind, and scattered granite hills rise from the landscape like ancient islands of stone. Birds call from nearby trees. Somewhere in the distance, cattle bells clink softly. At first, nothing seems unusual about the landscape. But then you begin to notice the walls. Great, curved walls, made of thousands upon thousands of granite blocks, stacked carefully without mortar. Some rise more than 10 meters high. They twist and wind through the hills like silent stone rivers. Inside the walls are narrow passageways, courtyards, towers, and mysterious enclosures. The place feels ancient, quiet, and strangely powerful. This is Great Zimbabwe, one of the most remarkable archaeological sites in Africa, and for centuries it puzzled travellers, historians, and explorers. Who built this enormous stone city? How did they construct such massive structures without mortar? Why was it abandoned? And why did early outsiders refuse to believe that Africans themselves had created it? To understand the mystery, we have to go back nearly 1,000 years. The region that is now modern Zimbabwe sits in southern Africa, between the Zambezi and Limpopo rivers. Long before European explorers arrived, this land was home to thriving African societies connected by trade networks stretching across the continent. By around the 11th century, a powerful Shona-speaking culture began building something extraordinary among the granite hills. They constructed a city. Not a small village of huts, but a vast stone complex that eventually covered nearly 7 square kilometers. At its height, historians estimate that 10,000 to 20,000 people may have lived in and around the settlement. That made it one of the largest cities in sub-Saharan Africa at the time. The builders worked with the granite that surrounded them. The region is full of huge granite outcrops that naturally crack into flat slabs as they weather. Workers carefully shaped these slabs into bricks and stacked them with incredible precision. No mortar, no cement, just carefully balanced stone. The result was architecture that has survived for centuries. The most famous structure is known today as the Great Enclosure. Its outer wall forms a massive oval nearly 250 meters around. In some places, it stands more than 11 meters high and 5 meters thick. Inside the enclosure stands a strange cone-shaped tower made of solid stone. No doorway, no windows, just a massive tapering column rising toward the sky. Its purpose remains one of the site's enduring mysteries. Some archaeologists believe it symbolized royal authority or grain storage, representing wealth and power. Others think it may have had religious significance connected to fertility or leadership. Nearby lies the hill complex, perched on a rocky hill overlooking the surrounding land. This area contains narrow passageways, stone platforms, and high defensive walls. Many researchers believe this was the residence of the ruling elite. From the hill, leaders could watch over the entire settlement. And beyond the stone walls stretched a thriving community of homes built from clay and wood. But Great Zimbabwe was not isolated. In fact, it sat at the heart of a vast trading network. The kingdom controlled access to rich gold deposits in the region. Traders carried this gold to the eastern coast of Africa, where it was exchanged with merchants from Arabia, India, and China. Archaeologists have found remarkable evidence of this global trade at the site. Chinese porcelain from the Ming dynasty, Persian glass beads, Arabian coins, all discovered among the ruins. These objects tell a story of a city deeply connected to the wider world. Caravans likely carried ivory, gold, and animal skins eastward toward coastal trading ports like Kilwa. In return, came luxury goods from across the Indian Ocean. Great Zimbabwe became the capital of a powerful kingdom that flourished between the 12th and 15th centuries. The name itself offers a clue to its significance. Zimbabwe comes from the Shona phrase Zimba Zamabwe, which means houses of stone. And indeed, these stone houses represented wealth and authority. In the surrounding region, most ordinary homes were made of earth and wood. Only rulers and elites could command the labor needed to build with stone. the city became both a political centre and a symbol of power. But by the late 1400s, something began to change. The population declined, trade routes shifted, and gradually the city was abandoned. Why? That question has puzzled historians for generations. One likely explanation involves environmental pressure. As the population grew, the surrounding land may have struggled to support so many people and cattle. Overgrazing and deforestation could have made farming difficult. Water resources may also have become strained. Another possibility involves shifting trade networks. As new political centres emerged further north, merchants may have bypassed Great Zimbabwe in favour of other cities. Powerful successor states, such as the Mutapa Kingdom, eventually rose in the region, and the political centre of gravity moved with them. Whatever the reason, by the early 16th century, the once thriving city stood largely empty. The stone walls remained, but the bustling life within them had faded. When Portuguese explorers arrived in southern Africa in the 1500s, local communities already regarded the ruins as ancient. They told stories of earlier kings and powerful rulers who once lived there. The Portuguese recorded descriptions of the stone city, but did not fully understand its origins. Centuries later, when European explorers and settlers reached the region in the 1800s, they encountered the ruins again. And here, the mystery took a strange and troubling turn. Many early European observers simply refused to believe that African civilizations had built such impressive structures. Instead, they invented elaborate theories. Some claimed the city had been built by ancient Phoenicians, the seafaring traders from the Mediterranean. Others suggested it was constructed by Arabs. A few even proposed connections to the Queen of Sheba, imagining that her legendary gold mines might have been located here. These theories were not based on evidence. They reflected the colonial attitudes of the time, when many Europeans assumed that complex architecture must have come from outside Africa. But archaeological research gradually told a different story. Beginning in the early 20th century, careful excavations revealed pottery, tools, and cultural artifacts clearly linked to local African traditions. Carbon dating confirmed that the city had been built during the medieval period by the ancestors of the Shona people. Stone construction techniques matched local methods, and oral histories from regional communities supported the idea of a powerful indigenous kingdom. Today, historians are confident that Great Zimbabwe was built by African engineers, planners, and labourers whose skills rivaled those of any contemporary civilization. The ruins are now a UNESCO World Heritage Site and a powerful symbol of national identity for the country of Zimbabwe, which took its name from the ancient city. Yet, despite decades of research, some mysteries remain. Take the famous Zimbabwe birds, for example. During excavations in the late 1800s, archaeologists discovered several carved soapstone sculptures depicting stylized birds perched on the tall columns. Each bird has a distinctive shape, with curved beaks and patterned feathers. Their meaning is still debated. Some scholars believe they represent sacred birds associated with royal authority. Others think they may symbolize communication between the earthly world and the spiritual realm. Today, the Zimbabwe bird appears on the national flag of Zimbabwe, becoming a symbol that connects the modern nation to its ancient heritage. And then, there are the theories that wander into more speculative territory. Some writers have suggested that Great Zimbabwe was part of a lost global civilization that predates recorded history. These ideas often appear in fringe archaeology books that link distant monuments across the world. There is no credible evidence supporting such claims, but the impressive scale of the ruins certainly sparks the imagination. Standing inside the great enclosure today, visitors often describe a strange feeling of timelessness. The curved stone walls create echoing corridors where footsteps bounce softly off the granite. The passageways twist and narrow in ways that seem intentionally designed. Some historians believe the architecture may have been meant to control movement during ceremonial processions or royal rituals. Others suspect it reinforced social hierarchy, separating rulers from ordinary residents. We may never know every detail, but the city itself still tells a powerful story. It tells us that long before European colonization, Southern Africa was home to complex societies capable of large-scale engineering, long-distance trade, and sophisticated political organization. Great Zimbabwe was not an isolated curiosity. It was part of a thriving network of African kingdoms that shaped the region's history for centuries. And even now, as the sun sets across the grassy plateau and shadows stretch along the ancient walls, the ruins seem to whisper fragments of that past. A royal court once gathered here. Merchants once traded gold and ivory. Drums once echoed across the valley. Today only the stone remains. But sometimes stone is enough. Enough to remind us that entire civilizations can rise, flourish, and fade away, leaving behind silent monuments for future generations to puzzle over. Great Zimbabwe is one of those monuments. A place where mystery, history, and human ingenuity meet among the granite hills, and where the past still lingers quietly in the walls. High in the mountains of northern Laos lies a landscape that feels strangely out of place. The hills roll gently across the horizon, covered in grass and scattered trees. Mist often drifts through the valleys in the early morning. During the rainy season, the air smells rich with wet earth and jungle plants. At first glance, the land seems peaceful, quiet, ordinary. But then you begin to notice something unusual sitting among the grass. A stone jar. Then another, and another. Soon there are dozens, then hundreds. Some stand upright, others lean at odd angles. A few lie broken, split into giant fragments. Many are weathered by centuries of wind and rain. Each jar is carved from solid stone. Most are about 1 to 3 meters tall, though some are larger still. Their interiors are hollow, like enormous containers left behind by some ancient giant. No lids remain on most of them. No inscriptions explain their purpose, and they are scattered across the countryside in groups that sometimes stretch for kilometers. This strange archaeological landscape is known as the Plain of Jars, and it has puzzled historians and archaeologists for nearly a century. Who carved these massive stone vessels? Why were they placed across these hills? And perhaps the biggest question of all, what were they actually used for? To understand the mystery, we first need to imagine the region long before modern borders and roads. Northern Laos sits at the crossroads of Southeast Asia. For thousands of years, different cultures passed through these mountains, trading goods and ideas along routes that connected China, Vietnam, Thailand, and the wider Mekong region. By the time the jars were created, the area was likely home to complex societies involved in regional trade networks, but exactly which culture built them remains uncertain. The jars themselves are remarkable pieces of craftsmanship. Most are carved from sandstone or granite, shaped using iron tools. Some weigh several tons. Considering the technology available at the time, transporting these enormous objects across rough hillsides would have required careful planning and large groups of workers. Some jars appear relatively simple, with straight sides and rounded rims. Others have carved decorative lips or subtle patterns. Nearby, archaeologists have also discovered large stone discs that may once have served as lids, though they are rarely found positioned directly on top of the jars today. More than 90 jar sites have now been identified across the region. Some contain just a handful of jars, others contain hundreds. The largest known site holds more than 400 jars spread across the grassy plateau. Despite the size and number of these objects, the outside world knew almost nothing about them until the early 20th century. In the 1930s, a French archaeologist named Madeleine Colani began studying the mysterious jars. She carefully mapped many of the sites and conducted some of the first scientific excavations in the area. What she discovered added even more intrigue. Buried near some of the jars were human remains, bones, teeth, fragments of burial goods. Colani believed the jars were connected to ancient funerary practices. In her theory, bodies may have been placed inside the jars temporarily while they decomposed, a practice sometimes known as secondary burial. Later, the bones would be removed and buried nearby in smaller graves. This idea seemed plausible, especially since similar practices existed in other parts of Southeast Asia, but not everyone agreed. One reason is that relatively few human remains have been found inside the jars themselves. Most burials appear in the surrounding soil rather than within the stone containers. This raises the possibility that the jars had another purpose entirely. Over the years, researchers have proposed many theories. Some believe the jars were used to collect rainwater for travelers moving along ancient trade routes. The region experiences heavy seasonal rains, and large stone containers could have served as reservoirs. Another theory suggests the jars stored rice wine or fermented food for ceremonial gatherings. And then there are the local legends. According to traditional Lao stories, the jars were created by a race of giants who once lived in the region. One tale describes a powerful king named Kun Chung who led a great battle against his enemies. After his victory, the giants supposedly celebrated by brewing enormous quantities of rice wine. The jars, according to the legend, were used to store the drink for the celebration. It is a charming story, but the true explanation is probably less mythical. Modern archaeological research suggests the jars were likely part of a large and complex burial landscape dating roughly between 500 BCE and 500 CE. Recent excavations have uncovered grave goods such as glass beads, iron tools, and pottery fragments buried around the jars. These items hint at ritual practices connected to death and remembrance. Some researchers believe the jars may have served as markers or ceremonial monuments associated with burial grounds rather than as actual containers for bodies. Others still support Colani's original theory of temporary burial. Unfortunately, studying the sites has not been easy. For decades, the region was one of the most dangerous archaeological areas in the world. During the Vietnam War, Laos became the target of an enormous bombing campaign. Between 1964 and 1973, millions of cluster bombs were dropped across the country. Many of them failed to explode. Even today, unexploded ordnance remains buried in the countryside. The Plain of Jars region was heavily affected. For years, archaeologists could only safely explore limited areas that had been cleared of bombs. Vast sections of the landscape remain dangerous and unexplored. This means many jar sites may still be waiting to be discovered. Despite these challenges, research has continued slowly and carefully. In recent years, teams using ground-penetrating radar and careful excavation techniques have uncovered new clues about the people who built the jars. One major discovery came when archaeologists identified the quarries where the stone jars were originally carved. These quarries lie several kilometers away from some of the jar sites. Massive, partially carved jars still sit abandoned there, frozen in the middle of their creation. The discovery confirmed that the jars were shaped at these quarry locations before being transported across the hills. Exactly how ancient workers moved objects weighing several tons remains another mystery. Some researchers suspect they used wooden sledges or rollers, possibly combined with ropes and coordinated teams of labourers. The process must have required enormous effort, and that effort suggests the jars were extremely important to the people who built them. Which brings us back to the central question. Why invest so much labour in creating thousands of giant stone jars? The most widely accepted answer today still involves ritual and burial traditions. Large monuments associated with death are common in many ancient cultures. From Egyptian pyramids to European stone circles, societies often created impressive structures to honour the dead or connect with spiritual beliefs. The jars may have been part of a similar tradition. But mystery still lingers. Even after nearly a century of study, no written records explain their purpose. No carvings clearly describe their meaning. And the people who built them left behind very few clues. Because of this, the Plain of Jars continues to attract speculation. Some fringe theories suggest the jars were part of an ancient alchemical process or used by a lost civilization with forgotten technology. Others claim the jars might have astronomical alignments connected to star patterns. So far, none of these ideas have convincing evidence. Yet when you stand among the jars, it is easy to see why imaginations run wild. They feel almost surreal in the quiet landscape. Rows of silent stone containers stretching across the hills. Some leaning slightly, as if slowly sinking back into the earth. Others standing proudly upright after more than 2,000 years. The wind whistles softly across their rims. Birds perch on their edges. And the mist drifts between them, like something out of a dream. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not simply what the jars were used for. It is the story of the people who made them. A culture capable of quarrying enormous stones, transporting them across mountains, and arranging them into ceremonial landscapes that still puzzle researchers today. Their names are lost, their language mostly vanished, but their work remains. Thousands of stone jars scattered across the hills of Laos, quietly waiting for someone, someday, to fully understand their purpose. Until then, the Plain of Jars remains one of archaeology's most fascinating puzzles, a place where history and legend sit side by side among the misty mountains, and where the past still whispers from inside enormous empty vessels carved from stone. In the rolling countryside of western Romania, not far from the gentle curve of the Mureș River, lies a quiet village called Tartaria. Today it is peaceful farmland. Fields stretch across low hills. Sheep graze along dirt roads. The rhythm of life moves slowly, much as it has for generations. Nothing about the landscape immediately suggests that it holds one of archaeology's most puzzling discoveries. But beneath the soil of this quiet region, buried for thousands of years, were 3 small clay objects that would spark one of the most heated debates in ancient history. They are known as the Tartaria tablets, and some researchers believe they might contain the oldest form of writing ever discovered. The story begins in the early 1960s. At that time, Romanian archaeologist Nicolae Vlasa was excavating a Neolithic settlement near the village. The site belonged to a culture known today as the Vinča culture, a prehistoric society that lived across parts of southeastern Europe roughly between 5,500 and 4,500 BCE. These people were farmers. They built villages of clay houses, raised livestock, and crafted pottery decorated with intricate patterns. Archaeologists had already discovered many artifacts from this culture, including figurines, tools, and beautifully decorated ceramics. But during Vlasa's excavation in 1961, something unusual appeared. Inside a small pit, possibly a ritual deposit or burial site, he found 3 clay tablets covered with strange markings. They were not large. 1 was round, 2 were rectangular. Each tablet was only a few centimeters wide, easily fitting in the palm of a hand. Yet the symbols carved into their surfaces immediately caught attention. Lines, crosses, triangles. Abstract shapes arranged in deliberate patterns. Some symbols resembled simple pictograms. Others looked more geometric, almost like stylized characters. To Vlasa, they seemed strikingly similar to early writing systems from the ancient Near East, particularly those used in Sumer, the civilization that flourished in Mesopotamia thousands of years later. If that resemblance was real, it would be astonishing. Because the Tartaria tablets were found in layers of soil dating to around 5,300 BCE, that would make them roughly 2,000 years older than the earliest known Sumerian writing. In other words, these tiny tablets might represent the oldest written symbols in human history. Naturally, the discovery caused excitement, but also skepticism. The tablets themselves are simple clay objects that were originally unfired. Vlasa reportedly baked them in a laboratory oven after discovery in order to preserve them. Unfortunately, that process complicated efforts to perform accurate radiocarbon dating directly on the tablets. Instead, researchers had to rely on dating the surrounding archaeological layer and nearby organic remains. Those results suggested a Neolithic age consistent with the Vinča culture. But some scholars wondered if the tablets might have been introduced into the layer later, perhaps accidentally mixed with older materials. The debate quickly grew intense, and it has continued for decades. To understand why these small objects cause so much controversy, we need to look at the broader context of early writing. For most of human history, information passed through spoken language and memory. Stories, traditions, and knowledge were carried from generation to generation through oral storytelling. Writing appeared much later. The earliest widely accepted writing system developed in ancient Sumer around 3200 BCE. Known as cuneiform, it used wedge-shaped marks pressed into clay tablets. At first, these symbols recorded economic transactions, lists of grain shipments, livestock counts, tax records. Over time, writing evolved into a sophisticated system capable of recording laws, literature, and mythology. But if the Tartaria tablets truly date to 5300 BCE, they suggest something remarkable. That symbolic communication resembling writing may have existed in Europe 2 millennia earlier than previously thought. Yet, there is a complication. Similar symbols appear on many artifacts from the broader Vinča culture: pottery fragments, figurines, clay tablets. These markings are sometimes called the Vinča symbols. Hundreds of examples have been discovered across southeastern Europe, but archaeologists still cannot agree on what they represent. Some researchers argue that the symbols form a genuine writing system. They point out that many signs repeat in different locations and appear arranged in structured sequences. Others believe the symbols are proto-writing. In this interpretation, they are meaningful marks or symbols used for ritual, ownership, or religious purposes, but not a full writing system representing language. A third group suggests they may simply be decorative or symbolic markings with no linguistic meaning at all. The Tartaria tablets sit right at the center of this debate. Their symbols appear arranged in rows, almost like sentences. One tablet even contains small holes, possibly indicating it was worn as an amulet or hung on a string. Some scholars believe the tablets might have been used in a ritual context, perhaps connected to religious ceremonies or social status. Others have attempted to compare the symbols with early Sumerian pictographs. A few researchers have even suggested cultural contact between southeastern Europe and Mesopotamia long before previously assumed. However, most historians remain cautious. While some symbols appear visually similar to Sumerian signs, resemblance alone does not prove a direct connection. Humans across different regions often create similar shapes independently. After all, lines, circles, and crosses are among the simplest forms humans can carve. Still, the mystery remains. And with mystery comes speculation. Over the years, the Tartaria tablets have attracted a wide range of theories. Some writers claim they prove the existence of a forgotten advanced civilization in prehistoric Europe. Others suggest they represent messages from a lost culture that once spread knowledge across the ancient world. More imaginative theories wander even further. A few fringe authors have proposed that the tablets contain encoded knowledge from a mythical civilization, sometimes referred to as Tartaria, a supposed ancient empire that appears mostly in conspiracy theories rather than historical evidence. Despite the similarity in name, this idea has nothing to do with the Romanian village of Tartaria or the tablets themselves. Historians found no evidence supporting such claims. But the internet has a way of amplifying mysterious connections. The truth, as usual, is likely both simpler and more fascinating. The Vinča culture itself was already remarkably advanced for its time. Their settlements were among the largest Neolithic communities in Europe. Some villages contained hundreds of houses arranged in planned layouts. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of early copper metallurgy, sophisticated pottery production, and long-distance trade networks. These people were not primitive wanderers. They were organized agricultural societies with complex traditions and symbolic systems. It is entirely possible that the Vinča symbols were part of a structured communication system that has simply not survived in enough examples for us to fully understand. Imagine trying to decipher a language with only a handful of sentences remaining. That is roughly the challenge researchers face. Today, the original Tartaria tablets are preserved in Romania's National Museum of Transylvanian History. They are small, unassuming, easy to overlook in a display case. But their significance lies in the questions they raise. Did prehistoric Europeans develop an early form of writing that vanished long before recorded history? Or are the tablets simply ritual symbols that resemble writing by coincidence? Perhaps future discoveries will provide the missing pieces. New archaeological sites may reveal additional tablets or inscriptions that clarify how these symbols were used. Until then, the Tartaria tablets remain a whisper from a distant past. 3 small pieces of clay carrying mysterious marks made more than 7,000 years ago. Marks left by human hands in a world where cities did not yet exist, where metal tools were rare, and where history itself had not yet begun to be written. What those marks truly meant, we still do not know. But they remind us that the earliest chapters of human civilization may still be hiding beneath the soil, waiting quietly for someone to uncover them. And perhaps, someday, to finally understand the message they carry. High above the city of Cusco, in the Andes Mountains of Peru, sits a place that almost seems to defy belief. The air is thin here. Nearly 3,700 meters above sea level, the wind moves across the hills in slow, steady gusts. Below, the red roofs of Cusco spread across the valley like a patchwork of clay tiles. Snow-capped peaks stand watch on the horizon. And on the hill above the city rises a structure built from stone so enormous that the first Europeans who saw it struggled to understand how it could possibly have been made. This is Sacsayhuaman. At first glance, it looks like a massive fortress. Giant zigzagging walls stretch across the hillside in 3 long tiers. Each wall is built from enormous limestone blocks fitted together with astonishing precision. The largest known block at the site is estimated to weigh around 125 tons. Yet there is no mortar holding them together. Each stone is carved so carefully that the surfaces lock together like pieces of a puzzle. The joints are so tight that even a thin blade cannot slip between them. Standing in front of these walls today, visitors often feel a strange sense of disbelief. How did people move stones this large without cranes, steel tools, or modern machinery? How were the blocks shaped so precisely? And perhaps, most intriguing of all, why were they built in the first place? To answer those questions, we need to travel back to the time of the Inca Empire, one of the most remarkable civilizations in the Americas. By the 15th century, the Incas ruled a vast empire stretching along the western edge of South America. Their territory extended nearly 4,000 kilometers from modern Ecuador to central Chile. Despite having no iron tools, no wheeled vehicles, and no written language in the traditional sense, the Incas built an advanced and highly organized society. They constructed thousands of kilometers of roads across mountains and deserts. They engineered terraces that allowed crops to grow on steep slopes. They created suspension bridges woven from plant fibers that spanned deep river gorges. And at the heart of their empire stood Cusco, their capital city. According to Inca tradition, Cusco was designed in the shape of a puma, a sacred animal representing strength and power. If you imagine the city as the body of the puma, then Sacsayhuaman formed its head. Construction of the complex likely began in the 15th century under the Inca ruler Pachacuti, the emperor who transformed the Inca state into a powerful empire. Work continued under his successors for decades. Spanish chroniclers later recorded astonishing accounts of the labour involved. Tens of thousands of workers were reportedly organised into teams, cutting stone, transporting blocks, and shaping them into place. The Incas had a system known as mitar, a form of labour tax. Citizens contributed work to large state projects such as roads, temples, and fortifications. Sacsayhuaman may have been one of the largest projects ever undertaken through this system. The outer walls are the most famous part of the complex. They stretch roughly 400 metres across the hillside, arranged in a dramatic zigzag pattern that resembles the teeth of a saw. Some historians believe this design may have symbolised the lightning bolt, a sacred image in Andean cosmology. The stones themselves are masterpieces of engineering. Rather than cutting blocks into simple rectangular shapes, Inca masons carved them into complex multi-angled forms with as many as 12 sides. Each block was then carefully fitted to its neighbours. This technique made the walls incredibly stable, especially in an earthquake-prone region like the Andes. In fact, many of Cusco's Spanish colonial buildings suffered damage during earthquakes over the centuries, while the Inca stone walls beneath them remained standing. But the construction process remains one of the great puzzles. The limestone used at Sacsayhuaman came from quarries several kilometres away. Somehow, ancient workers transported blocks weighing dozens of tons across rugged terrain and uphill to the construction site. Without wheels, without draft animals like horses or oxen. The most widely accepted explanation is surprisingly simple, though still impressive. Large teams of workers likely used ropes, wooden rollers, and earthen ramps to drag the stones across the landscape. Archaeological evidence suggests that massive manpower and careful coordination made the task possible. Once at the site, masons shaped each stone gradually, repeatedly placing and adjusting it against neighbouring blocks until the fit was perfect. It was slow work, but the results were extraordinary. Yet Sacsayhuaman was not only an architectural achievement, it also played an important role in Inca history. In 1536, just a few years after Spanish conquistadors captured the Inca emperor Atahualpa, a major rebellion broke out against Spanish rule. The leader of the rebellion was Manco Inca, a ruler installed by the Spanish who eventually turned against them. During the uprising, Inca forces seized control of Sacsayhuaman and used its high position to attack Spanish troops occupying Cusco below. For a time, the rebellion came close to driving the Spaniards out. But after intense fighting, Spanish forces eventually captured the fortress. The battle marked a turning point in the struggle between the Inca resistance and the Spanish conquest. In the years that followed, the conquerors dismantled many of the upper structures of Sacsayhuaman. The finely cut stones were reused to build colonial churches and buildings in Cusco. Fortunately, the enormous lower walls were too massive to move, and they remain standing today. But even with historical explanations, the site continues to inspire mystery. Because when you stand beside those gigantic stones, it is hard not to wonder if something more unusual might be involved. Over the years, many alternative theories have appeared. Some claim the stones were softened somehow before being shaped, perhaps through the use of a lost plant extract or chemical process. Others suggest the Incas possessed forgotten technologies that allowed them to cut stone with incredible precision. And of course, there are the more dramatic theories. Some writers have proposed that ancient aliens helped construct sites like Sacsayhuaman, arguing that the stones are too large and complex to have been built by humans alone. Archaeologists strongly reject this idea. Not only is there no evidence for extraterrestrial involvement, but there are many examples of ancient societies around the world moving massive stones using human labour and clever engineering. Stonehenge in England, the pyramids of Egypt, the statues of Easter Island. Human history is full of impressive feats of construction. The Incas were simply among the most skilled stone builders who ever lived. Still, certain details of Sacsayhuaman remain fascinating. Some of the stone surfaces contain mysterious grooves and carved shapes whose purpose is unclear. A few blocks appear partially shaped but never finished. And the exact method used to achieve such precise stone fitting continues to be studied by engineers and archaeologists. Yet perhaps the greatest mystery is not technological. It is cultural. Sacsayhuaman was likely far more than a fortress. Many historians believe it also served as a ceremonial and religious centre connected to important festivals of the Inca calendar. One of the most famous of these celebrations was Inti Raymi, the festival of the sun. Every year during the winter solstice, the Inca people gathered to honour Inti, their sun god. The emperor and priests conducted rituals, offered sacrifices, and prayed for the return of the sun's warmth and the fertility of the land. Modern reenactments of this ceremony are still performed today at Sacsayhuaman, drawing visitors from around the world. As the sun sets over the Andes and the light fades across the ancient stones, the site becomes quiet again. The massive walls cast long shadows across the hillside. The wind moves through the grass, and the giant stones remain exactly where Inca builders placed them more than 500 years ago. Silent, immovable. A reminder of a civilization that mastered the mountains and shaped stone with extraordinary skill. Sacsayhuaman is not just a fortress. It is a monument to patience, craftsmanship, and human ingenuity. A place where the past stands literally carved into the landscape, and where even today, surrounded by the high peaks of the Andes, those enormous stones still invite us to ask the same question travellers have asked for centuries. How exactly did they do it? Somewhere in the humid lowlands of southern Mexico, long before cities rose across Mesoamerica and long before the Maya began carving elegant hieroglyphs into stone, someone sat down with a slab of rock and began to carve. Not a picture of a jaguar, not a portrait of a king, but symbols. Strange little shapes. A fish, a corn cob, something like an insect. A curious rectangle crossed with lines, and dozens more. 32 symbols in all, carefully arranged in rows across the face of a stone slab roughly the size of a small laptop. Who carved them? What did they say? And perhaps most intriguingly of all, are they the oldest writing ever discovered in the Americas? This is the mystery of the Cascajal block. A quiet archaeological puzzle that has been stirring debates among historians, linguists, and archaeologists for nearly 2 decades. The story begins not in an ancient temple or a dramatic jungle excavation, but in a gravel pit. In the late 1990s, workers near the village of Cascajal in the Mexican state of Veracruz were digging up earth to use for road construction. This area sits within the ancient heartland of the Olmec civilization, one of the earliest complex cultures in Mesoamerica. The Olmecs flourished roughly between 1500 and 400 BCE. If the Maya and Aztecs were the later celebrities of ancient Mexico, the Olmecs were the mysterious pioneers who came before them. They built ceremonial centers deep in the tropical lowlands. They carved enormous basalt heads weighing up to 20 tons, each with distinctive faces and helmet-like headgear. They traded jade, obsidian, and exotic materials across large distances. And they left behind just enough evidence to prove they were incredibly sophisticated, while leaving many of their secrets locked away. The gravel pit where the stone appeared was located near the ancient Olmec site of San Lorenzo, one of the earliest major centers of Olmec culture. San Lorenzo thrived around 1400 to 1000 BCE and is famous for its colossal heads, intricate drainage systems, and finely carved monuments. At some point during the digging, workers unearthed a curious object, a flat slab of serpentine stone covered in odd markings. The stone eventually came into the hands of local authorities and then into the attention of archaeologists. Among them were 2 researchers who would later publish the discovery: Carmen Rodriguez and Ponciano Ortiz, archaeologists who had been studying the Olmec region for years. When scholars finally examined the slab closely, they noticed something striking. The markings did not appear random, they were organized in horizontal rows, almost like lines of text. Some symbols repeated, others appeared only once. There was structure, pattern, intent. In 2006, the discovery was formally announced in the journal Science, and the academic world immediately began buzzing. If the interpretation was correct, this stone could represent the earliest known writing system in the Western Hemisphere. The Cascajal block measures about 36 centimeters long, 21 centimeters wide, and about 13 centimeters thick. It weighs roughly 12 kilograms. The surface is slightly curved, and the carvings appear to have been etched with careful, deliberate strokes. Altogether, there are 62 individual carvings representing 28 distinct symbols. Some look vaguely familiar, though not quite identifiable. A shape resembling a fish, a stylized ear of corn, a shell-like form, crosses, rectangles, and abstract geometric patterns. Unlike later Mesoamerican scripts, the symbols do not resemble the flowing, ornate glyphs of the Maya. They are simpler, almost playful in appearance. And they run in lines. 3 main horizontal rows stretch across the block, suggesting that whoever carved them intended the symbols to be read in sequence. Which brings us to the central mystery. If this truly is writing, what language does it represent? Because the Olmecs left us something rather inconvenient. They left almost no decipherable texts. Unlike the Maya, who filled temples and monuments with inscriptions, the Olmecs rarely carved lengthy written records. Their art focuses on rulers, deities, animals, and ritual scenes. That has made them one of the most enigmatic civilizations in the ancient Americas. So when the Cascajal block appeared, scholars immediately asked an obvious question. Is this truly writing? Or is it something else? The dating of the block adds to the intrigue. Based on the surrounding archaeological material where it was reportedly found, researchers estimate the slab may date to around 900 BCE, possibly earlier. If correct, that would place it centuries before the earliest confirmed Zapotec writing in Oaxaca and roughly contemporaneous with early scripts emerging in other parts of the world. To put that in perspective, around 900 BCE, the Assyrians were dominating the Near East, Greek alphabetic writing was still developing, and in China, the Zhou dynasty had begun its long rule. Meanwhile, deep in the tropical forests of Veracruz, someone might have been quietly carving the first written symbols in the Americas. At least, that is the exciting interpretation. But archaeology rarely settles for excitement alone. Some scholars quickly raised concerns. One major issue is the context of discovery. The block was not excavated during a controlled archaeological dig. It came from disturbed earth in a gravel pit. That means its precise original location is uncertain. Without a secure archaeological context, dating becomes more complicated. Another issue involves the symbols themselves. Writing systems usually show certain patterns. For example, many scripts have dozens or even hundreds of characters. They often follow consistent orientation. Repeated sequences may indicate grammar or common words. The Cascajal block symbols repeat, but not in obvious grammatical structures. Some appear only once, which is unusual for such a short text. And, unlike many writing systems, the symbols vary widely in style and complexity. Still, supporters argue the patterns are too organized to be random. The rows appear deliberate. Certain symbols cluster together. Others repeat at intervals. One symbol, resembling a sort of insect or possibly a maize ear, appears several times across the rows. That repetition could represent a word, a sound, or perhaps a title. Because we cannot read it, interpretation remains speculative. This has not stopped people from trying. Some researchers have suggested the block could record a ritual text. Others think it may list offerings, names of rulers, or even an early form of calendar notation. And then, of course, there are the more imaginative theories. Whenever ancient writing appears suddenly, speculation tends to follow. Some fringe writers have proposed connections between the Cascajal symbols and scripts from entirely different continents. Comparisons have been made to Egyptian hieroglyphs, Chinese characters, even hypothetical lost civilizations. There is, however, no credible evidence for those connections. Most archaeologists remain cautious and prefer explanations grounded in local development. The leading interpretation today is that the Cascajal block may represent an early experimental writing system used by the Olmecs, or a closely related culture. In other words, it could be a snapshot of writing in its early stages. Human writing systems rarely appear fully formed. They evolve gradually, often starting as pictorial symbols representing objects or ideas. Over time, those pictures become stylized. Eventually, they represent sounds or syllables. If the Cascajal block truly dates to around 900 BCE, it might represent a moment in that evolutionary process, a time when symbols were still closely tied to visual objects. A fish meant fish, corn meant corn, a shell meant shell. But perhaps they also carried deeper meanings understood by the people who used them. There is another possibility as well. The block might not be a full writing system at all, but rather a symbolic record, something halfway between art and writing. Ancient cultures often used repeating symbols to represent rituals, clan identities, or sacred concepts without necessarily encoding spoken language. In that case, the Cascajal block could be a ceremonial object rather than a readable text. Imagine a priest or artisan carefully carving sacred icons into stone, arranging them in meaningful sequences known only to initiates. A kind of symbolic prayer written in pictures. Until more examples appear, the truth remains uncertain. And that is perhaps the most tantalizing aspect of the mystery. The Cascajal block is completely unique. No other artifact quite like it has been discovered. Not yet, at least. Archaeologists continue to study the Olmec heartland, and new discoveries appear every year. It is entirely possible that someday another inscribed slab will emerge from the soil, perhaps with longer sequences or clearer patterns. If that happens, linguists may finally have enough material to begin decoding the symbols. Until then, the block sits quietly in museums and research collections, its strange carvings staring back at modern viewers. 32 symbols arranged in neat rows. A message from nearly 3,000 years ago. We can see it clearly. We just cannot read it. And somewhere in the humid forests of Veracruz, beneath layers of earth and centuries of forgotten history, there may still be more stones waiting patiently to speak. We simply have to find them. If you were walking through a forest in central Germany on a quiet summer evening about 3,600 years ago, the sky above you would have looked both familiar and mysterious. The same stars we see today would have been scattered across the darkness. The moon would have waxed and waned just as it does now. And each year, at certain moments, the sun would rise and set in precise positions along the horizon, marking the slow rhythm of the seasons. To us, these patterns are ordinary. We check calendars and weather forecasts. We glance at our phones to know when winter will begin or when daylight will return. But for people living in the Bronze Age, the sky was something else entirely. It was the grand clock of the universe. It told farmers when to plant crops. It told travellers when seasons would change. And for many ancient cultures, it was also the realm of gods. Which brings us to one of the most astonishing archaeological discoveries ever made in Europe, the Nebra sky disk. It looks simple at first glance. A round bronze plate, about the size of a dinner plate, darkened with age. Scattered across its surface are small golden shapes, a crescent moon, a large circular disk, and clusters of tiny golden dots representing stars. But when archaeologists began studying this object, they realized something extraordinary. This was not decoration. It was a map of the sky. And possibly the oldest known realistic depiction of the cosmos anywhere in the world. The story of the Nebra sky disk begins not with careful archaeologists, but with a pair of treasure hunters armed with metal detectors. In the summer of 1999, 2 amateur artifact hunters were searching a forested hill called the Mittelberg, near the town of Nebra, in eastern Germany. The region is quiet and rural, dotted with fields, forests, and low rolling hills. At some point during their search, their detector beeped. They dug down and struck metal. What they uncovered was a small hoard of ancient objects. 2 bronze swords, 2 axes, a chisel, fragments of bracelets, and one strange circular plate covered in dirt and corrosion. The men did not realize the importance of what they had found. But they did know one thing. It was old, and it might be valuable. The objects were removed illegally. In Germany, archaeological artifacts belong to the state, and removing them without permission is against the law. The treasure hunters sold the items on the black market. For the next few years, the mysterious bronze disc passed quietly through the hands of collectors and dealers. During that time, it was handled poorly, even damaged. At one point, someone tried to clean it with harsh chemicals, scratching parts of the surface. Then, in 2002, the authorities set up a sting operation. Archaeologists had heard rumours about a strange Bronze Age disc circulating in the underground antiquities market. They suspected it might be something extremely important, so police arranged a fake sale in a hotel in Basel, Switzerland. When the sellers arrived with the artifact, police moved in and confiscated the objects. At last, the Nebra sky disk was in the hands of scientists. When researchers first examined it, they were stunned. The disk measures about 30 centimeters across and weighs just over 2 kilograms. It is made of bronze, but over centuries the metal developed a dark green patina. Against this deep background, thin sheets of gold had been carefully hammered and applied to create bright shapes. At the center of the disk sits a large golden circle. This might represent the sun, or possibly the full moon. Next to it is a crescent shape clearly representing the moon in its waxing or waning phase. Scattered across the surface are 32 small gold dots, which appear to represent stars. 7 of these stars form a tight cluster. That cluster matches almost perfectly with a famous group of stars visible to the naked eye, the Pleiades. If you have ever looked at the winter sky and noticed a tiny cluster of sparkling stars that looks almost like a miniature dipper, you have seen the Pleiades. They have fascinated humans for thousands of years and appear in mythologies around the world. Seeing them on the Nebra disk was the first hint that this object might represent the real sky. But there was more. Along the left and right edges of the disk are 2 curved golden arcs. These were added later, after the original design was created. When researchers measured the angle between these arcs, they discovered something remarkable. The angle corresponds almost exactly to the difference between where the sun rises on the horizon during the summer solstice and where it rises during the winter solstice at the latitude of central Germany. In other words, the arcs mark the solar year. Later still, another gold arc was added along the bottom of the disk, shaped like a curved boat. Many scholars believe this represents the solar barge, a mythological vessel that carries the sun across the sky or through the underworld. Similar ideas appear in several ancient cultures. Taken together, the symbols form something extraordinary, a portable model of the heavens. So, how old is it? By studying the associated bronze weapons found with the disc and analysing the metal itself, archaeologists dated the artifact to around 1600 BCE, during the European Bronze Age. That makes it roughly 3,600 years old. For comparison, this was around the same time that the great Mycenaean palaces flourished in Greece, and centuries before the rise of classical Greek civilization. Northern Europe during this period had no written language that we know of, and yet someone had created an astronomical instrument. That realization forced historians to rethink what Bronze Age Europeans understood about the sky. For many years, scholars believed sophisticated astronomy developed primarily in ancient civilizations like Egypt, Mesopotamia, and later Greece. But the Nebra sky disk suggested that knowledge of celestial cycles had spread far beyond those regions. Whoever made this object clearly understood the relationship between the sun's movement and the seasons. The disk may have been used to synchronize lunar and solar calendars, which is an incredibly complex problem. A lunar month lasts about 29.5 days. 12 lunar months equal about 354 days, which is 11 days shorter than the solar year. Over time, the seasons drift out of alignment with the lunar calendar. Many ancient cultures solved this by occasionally inserting an extra month. The Nebra sky disk may have helped track this relationship using the Pleiades as a reference point. If that interpretation is correct, it means Bronze Age observers in Central Europe were carefully studying the sky and using that knowledge to manage agricultural timekeeping, which is astonishing. But the mystery does not end there. We still do not know exactly who made the disk. The region where it was discovered was inhabited by the Unetice culture, an early Bronze Age society that traded metals, tools, and luxury items across large parts of Europe. The gold used in the disk came from the Carpathian Mountains. The copper used in the bronze likely came from the Alps. The tin may have originated as far away as Cornwall in Britain. In other words, this single object contains materials from across the continent. It was the product of an interconnected Bronze Age world. As remarkable as the scientific explanation is, the Nebra sky disk has also inspired more imaginative theories. Some people have claimed it proves ancient Europeans possessed forgotten astronomical knowledge. Others have suggested it was a sacred object used in priestly rituals, perhaps representing a mythological vision of the heavens rather than a scientific diagram. And of course, whenever ancient artifacts look mysterious, someone inevitably suggests extraterrestrial involvement. But there is no need for aliens here. Human curiosity about the sky is ancient and universal. Every culture that ever looked up at the night sky eventually began asking the same questions. Why do the stars move? Why do seasons change? Why does the moon grow and shrink? The Nebra sky disk is simply one of the earliest surviving attempts to answer those questions. It is the work of careful observers who watched the heavens year after year, generation after generation. And at some point, someone decided to capture that knowledge in bronze and gold. Today, the disk is considered one of the most important archaeological discoveries in Europe. It is preserved in the State Museum of Prehistory in Halle, where it continues to fascinate scientists and visitors alike. What began as an illegal treasure hunt in a quiet German forest turned out to reveal a window into the minds of people who lived 36 centuries ago. People who, just like us, stood beneath the night sky and wondered how the universe worked. And who, with remarkable skill, tried to write that answer in metal. Imagine a forest in the Ural Mountains of Russia about 12,000 years ago. The last ice age is just beginning to loosen its grip on the northern hemisphere. Massive glaciers are retreating. The land is slowly warming. Rivers are swelling with meltwater, and vast forests of pine and birch are spreading across the landscape. In these forests live small groups of hunter-gatherers. They move with the seasons, following animals, gathering berries and plants, and crafting tools from stone, bone, and wood. They leave behind campfires, arrowheads, and small traces of daily life. But somewhere in this ancient landscape, someone decided to carve something extraordinary. Not a small figurine, not a tool, but a towering wooden monument covered in strange geometric symbols and human-like faces. Today, we call it the Shigir idol, and it is one of the most mysterious artifacts ever discovered. Not only because of its strange design, but because of its age. As modern scientists would eventually discover, this sculpture is more than 11,500 years old. That makes it older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids of Egypt, older than the earliest cities in human history. In fact, the Shigir idol may be the oldest known monumental sculpture on Earth. The story of its discovery begins in the 19th century, during a period when Russia was expanding its mining operations deep into the Ural Mountains. In 1890, workers were extracting gold from a peat bog near a place known as Shigir, about 100 kilometers north of the city of Yekaterinburg. Peat bogs are wet, oxygen-poor environments that sometimes preserve organic materials that would normally rot away. Wood, bone, leather, even plant fibers can survive for thousands of years when buried in peat. As miners dug deeper into the bog, they began to uncover strange wooden fragments. At first, they seemed like ordinary pieces of ancient timber. But as more fragments appeared, workers realized something unusual. These pieces had carvings on them. Not simple scratches, carefully made patterns. The fragments were eventually sent to a local museum where archaeologists began the delicate process of assembling them like pieces of a puzzle. Slowly, a remarkable object began to take shape. At first, the reconstructed statue stood about 2.8 meters tall, nearly the height of a small tree. Later, research suggested that the original sculpture may have been closer to 5 meters tall, although some of the upper pieces were likely lost before archaeologists could recover them. The idol had been carved from a single trunk of larch wood, a durable tree that grows in northern forests. At the top of the statue was a face, a simple but unmistakably human face with wide eyes, a long nose, and a straight mouth. Beneath it, the long wooden body was covered in rows of zigzag patterns, chevrons, and geometric designs carved deeply into the surface. As researchers studied the sculpture more carefully, they noticed something even stranger. There was not just one face. There were several. Along the length of the idol, additional faces appeared, each slightly different from the others. Some were subtle, almost hidden within the patterns. Others were clearer. Altogether, researchers identified 7 distinct faces carved into the statue. Each one seemed to mark a separate section of the figure's body, and each section was filled with intricate geometric ornamentation. The effect is both mesmerizing and slightly unsettling. The statue looks ancient in a way that is hard to describe. Its sharp angles and abstract shapes feel strangely modern, almost like something from 20th century art. But it was carved thousands upon thousands of years earlier. For decades after its discovery, archaeologists assumed the idol was several thousand years old, perhaps from the Bronze Age or early Iron Age. That was already impressive. But in the 1990s, scientists decided to perform modern radiocarbon dating on small samples of the wood. The results were shocking. The statue dated to roughly 7,500 BCE. In other words, the Shigir idol was more than twice as old as previously believed. Many researchers were skeptical at first. The idea that hunter-gatherers living so early in human history had created such a large and complex sculpture challenged long-held assumptions. So, in 2018, scientists conducted new tests using improved dating techniques. The results confirmed the original findings. The idol was approximately 11,500 years old, dating to the early Mesolithic period, shortly after the end of the Ice Age. That discovery forced historians to rethink what early hunter-gatherer societies were capable of. For a long time, there was a common assumption that monumental art and symbolic complexity emerged mainly with the rise of farming and permanent settlements. But the Shigir idol tells a different story. Here we have a massive wooden monument carved with elaborate symbolism thousands of years before agriculture appeared in the region. Clearly, these early people were not just surviving. They were thinking deeply about the world around them. Which brings us to the next great mystery. What does it all mean? No one knows for certain. The geometric carvings that cover the idol are unlike any writing system. They are decorative, but they seem too deliberate to be purely ornamental. Some scholars believe the patterns may represent maps of rivers or landscapes, perhaps describing the territory used by the people who carved it. Others think the zigzags may symbolize water or snakes, which appear frequently in ancient mythologies as powerful spiritual forces. Another theory suggests the statue represents a totem or ancestor spirit, with each face marking a different being or stage in a mythological story. Because the sculpture was found deep in a peat bog, some archaeologists suspect it may have stood near a sacred wetland site. Across many ancient cultures, bogs and wetlands were seen as mysterious places where the natural and supernatural worlds overlapped. Objects were often placed in such environments as offerings to spirits or gods. It is possible the idol once stood upright near the edge of a lake or marsh, towering above the water like a guardian figure. Over centuries, the surrounding land may have flooded and turned into the peat bog where it was eventually preserved. Another intriguing idea comes from researchers who noticed that the patterns on the idol resemble warning symbols. According to this interpretation, the carvings might represent danger signs or tribal knowledge, perhaps warning travellers about hazards in the landscape. Think of it as a kind of prehistoric information board carved into wood. Yet another theory suggests the statue may have been used in ritual storytelling. Each face could represent a character in a myth, while the patterns between them mark stages of a narrative known to the community. We may never know the exact meaning, but the very existence of the idol tells us something important. The people who created it lived in a world rich with symbolism and imagination. They were artists, they were storytellers, and they had the time, skill, and cultural motivation to carve a 5-meter tall monument from a single tree using stone tools. When modern visitors see the Shigir idol today, they often experience a strange feeling. The sculpture does not look primitive. It looks intentional, expressive, almost intellectual. Those sharp, geometric lines feel like a language we almost recognize but cannot quite translate. Naturally, this has also inspired some more speculative theories. A few fringe researchers have suggested the patterns resemble coded information, perhaps a forgotten prehistoric script. Others have gone even further, proposing that the statue contains astronomical or mathematical knowledge hidden within its designs. There is, however, no evidence for those ideas. The more grounded explanation is that the Shigir idol represents something deeply spiritual to the people who created it. A symbol of their beliefs about the world, the forest, and whatever forces they believed shaped their lives. One final detail makes the idol even more fascinating. Recent microscopic analysis of the carving marks has shown that the artist used several different stone tools to create the patterns. This means the sculpture was not made casually or quickly. It required planning. It required specialized tools. and it likely required many hours of careful work. Somewhere in the forests of the ancient Urals, an artist stood beside a fallen larch tree nearly 12,000 years ago. They began carving. First a face, then lines, then patterns flowing down the length of the trunk. A monument slowly emerging from wood. When they finished, the statue may have stood taller than any human nearby, covered in symbols whose meanings were clear to the people of that time. And for thousands of years, it stood there. Until eventually, it fell, was buried in peat, and waited patiently for modern humans to rediscover it. Today, the Shigir idol rests in the Sverdlovsk Regional Museum in Yekaterinburg. It is quiet there now, but if you stand in front of it long enough, looking at those ancient faces carved into the wood, you cannot help but wonder, what stories were they trying to tell? And what other voices from that distant world are still hidden beneath the forests and wetlands of our planet, waiting to be found? In museums across Scotland, in quiet glass display cases that most visitors walk past without a second glance, there are small stone objects that have puzzled archaeologists for more than a century and a half. They are not large. Most are about the size of a tennis ball. You could comfortably hold one in the palm of your hand. Some are slightly bigger, some slightly smaller, but nearly all share the same strange design. A round stone sphere, carefully shaped, and covered with evenly spaced knobs, ridges, or geometric carvings. Some have 6 knobs, like the corners of a cube pushed outward. Others have 4, 8, or even dozens of smaller bumps arranged in complex patterns. A few are decorated with spirals, rings, or finely carved lines that look almost like Celtic art, despite being far older than Celtic culture itself. They are known simply as the Scottish carved stone balls, and no one knows exactly what they were for. More than 400 of these objects have been discovered so far, mostly in northeastern Scotland, particularly in the region of Aberdeenshire. They date back roughly 4,000 to 5,000 years, placing them firmly in the late Neolithic period. This was the same era when people in Britain were building enormous stone monuments like Stonehenge and the stone circles of the Orkney Islands. But while those monuments clearly served ceremonial or astronomical purposes, the stone balls are far more mysterious. Because they are portable, carefully made, and completely unique. The first examples came to the attention of scholars in the 19th century, when farmers and local collectors began uncovering them in fields, burial sites, and ancient settlements. At first glance, they looked intriguing but puzzling. Some early antiquarians assumed they must be weapons. The logic seemed simple enough. A small, heavy stone ball with protruding knobs could make a very effective mace head if attached to a handle. But there was a problem. Most of the balls show no sign of attachment holes or grooves where a handle would have been secured. In addition, many of them are carved with such delicate detail that using them as weapons would almost certainly damage them. That seems like an odd choice for a battlefield tool. Others suggested they might have been thrown by hand, perhaps used as hunting projectiles or sling stones. But again, the carvings complicate that theory. Many of the balls are beautifully decorated with precise symmetry and careful craftsmanship. It seems unlikely that someone would spend hours carving intricate spirals onto an object intended to be hurled at an animal. So what exactly were they? To understand the mystery, it helps to imagine the world in which they were created. Around 2500 to 3000 BCE, the people of Neolithic Scotland lived in small farming communities scattered across rugged landscapes of hills, forests, and coastlines. They raised cattle, sheep, and pigs, grew grains like barley, and built sturdy stone houses that sometimes still survive today. These were not primitive societies struggling for survival. They were organised communities capable of transporting massive stones to build monuments, planning complex burial sites, and producing finely crafted tools and art. The carved stone balls fit neatly into that tradition of craftsmanship. Many are made from hard local stones like sandstone, granite, or gabbro. Carving these materials without metal tools required patience and skill. Researchers studying the balls have noticed that many are remarkably symmetrical. Some of the most famous examples have 6 evenly spaced knobs, forming shapes that resemble geometric solids known as Platonic forms. In fact, a few archaeologists have pointed out that certain balls resemble the shapes of cubes, tetrahedrons, or dodecahedrons. Whether this was intentional or coincidental is still debated, but the precision is undeniable. One particularly famous ball, found in Aberdeenshire, features swirling carved spirals that closely resemble patterns seen in Neolithic monuments like Newgrange in Ireland, a passage tomb built around 3200 BCE. Those spirals may have held symbolic meaning connected to cycles of life, death, or the movement of the sun. If similar ideas were present in Scotland, the carved balls may have carried symbolic or ritual importance rather than practical use. Over the years, archaeologists have proposed an impressive range of theories. One idea is that the balls were used as status symbols. Because they required time and skill to produce, owning one might have signalled prestige or authority within a community. Perhaps they were held by tribal leaders or important families, passed down across generations. Another theory suggests they were used in ceremonial gatherings, possibly as part of rituals or games whose meanings are now lost. Some scholars have wondered whether the balls might have been used as measuring tools or aids in construction. Their symmetrical shapes could theoretically help align structures or test geometric layouts, but there is little direct evidence to support that idea. One particularly creative theory suggests the balls might have been used to help move heavy stones when building monuments. According to this idea, placing several stone balls under large slabs could allow them to roll more easily across the ground, somewhat like primitive ball bearings. However, the theory struggles with practical issues. The balls are too small and too few in number to effectively move massive stones like those used at Stonehenge or other megalithic sites. And again, the intricate carvings seem unnecessary for construction tools. Then there are the more unusual interpretations. Some researchers have suggested the balls might have been used as weights for fishing nets or other equipment. Others have wondered if they were part of ancient board games, perhaps used as playing pieces or dice. A few have even proposed that they could have served as mathematical teaching tools, demonstrating symmetry and geometric forms to students. The truth is, every theory explains part of the puzzle, but leaves other questions unanswered. Perhaps the most interesting clue lies in where the balls are found. Many were discovered in areas associated with Neolithic ceremonial landscapes, including burial sites and stone circles. That suggests they may have played a role in rituals or social gatherings, but they are rarely found in large groups. Usually just one, occasionally two. almost as if each one belonged to a specific person. Some archaeologists have speculated that they might have been personal objects of power, similar to ceremonial staffs or symbolic tools used by leaders, healers, or spiritual figures. Imagine a community gathering around a fire at dusk. A respected elder or ritual leader holds a carved stone sphere, its patterns catching the flicker of the flames. Perhaps the knobs helped grip it. Perhaps each carved design represented stories or beliefs known to the community. Over time, the object becomes more than just stone. It becomes part of identity, memory, tradition. And when its owner dies, it might be placed carefully into the ground, waiting thousands of years to be rediscovered. Naturally, the mystery has also inspired more imaginative theories. Because some of the balls display striking geometric precision, a few writers have suggested they represent advanced mathematical knowledge far beyond what Neolithic societies should have possessed. A handful of fringe theories even propose that the shapes resemble objects used in modern engineering or physics, leading to speculation about lost ancient technologies. But there is no credible evidence supporting those claims. The more reasonable explanation is that ancient artisans simply enjoyed working with symmetry and patterns. Humans have always been drawn to geometry. Long before formal mathematics existed, people recognized shapes, balance, and repetition in nature. The carved stone balls may simply represent an early artistic exploration of those ideas. Even today, they remain captivating. More than 400 examples have been found, yet no two are exactly alike. Each one is slightly different, a different number of knobs, a different pattern of carving, a different personality, almost. And that individuality may be the biggest clue of all. These were not mass-produced objects. They were handcrafted, personal, perhaps even meaningful in ways we can only guess. Today, many of the finest examples are preserved in the National Museum of Scotland in Edinburgh, where visitors can see them lined up in display cases. Small stone spheres carved by hands that lived 5,000 years ago. They sit quietly there now, perfectly shaped, perfectly mysterious. And after more than a century of study, archaeologists are still asking the same simple question. What were they for?